Welcome, dear friend, in the second part of our discussion of the Daodejing. So, what kind of theater are you working for?
I can't talking.
You can't talking? Why not? How can you then perform on stage?
Otherwise, I have to move all muscles all around my mouth, my face. Then I.
Or you can become a tranquillist.
I'm Wednesday.
The Daodejing had a huge influence on politics, philosophy, medicine, arts, martial arts, military skills, religion, immortality practices, Confucianism, Buddhism, Daoism, of course, as a whole. Many people think that the Daoism starts with the Daodejing, but that is not true. Daodejing only shows a particular aspect of reality as it was seen in these texts, and it is part of a tradition which is coming all the way from Neolithic times to modern times. In a way, and that is my interpretation, I think the Daodejing is to preserve aspects of the nomadic lifestyle of Daoists. When you are a Daoist, you are obliged for 3 months per year to live in ditches. And that means that you do not live in your monastery, you do not live at your house, but you live basically from what the world can give you. And for this you have to have a nomadic lifestyle, you have to understand a little bit about nature, what you can eat, what you cannot eat. You're not allowed to take, you're not allowed to beg like what Buddhists do. Not at all. It's not about poverty, it is about survival, and Taoism is very much like that. The other aspect of Taoism is about Neidan and Weidan practice, and this is also part of the moral nature of the text of the Tao Te Ching. So now we come to the title and the name of Laozi. Laozi as a name means basically grandfather. Grandfather is the way how it's being used, and it is very often translated as old child, and it's an indication as such in both cases of a relative amount of senility where you can find wisdom if you pay proper attention to what is being said. So that is a very important part. Then the Tao Te Ching, Tao is then of course Tao, and De is the inherent virtue of things. Tao is through which things are being created from non-being to being, from the prenatal to the postnatal. And the De is the inherent quality as a result of that being created. When the Tao creates something, it doesn't create something from nothing and it just adds something to the creation as it is, but that what is created is automatically co-created by the interdependency with the things where it has to fit into. So when you are in accord with Tao, you're not just being in accord with Tao and therefore you be a creator. No, you are actually in accord with the with the interdependencies that are the foundation of reality as it is, and as a result of that, your spontaneity, and not your hysteria, your spontaneity is that of living without having to think about things, just moving along with things as they develop without creating problems for the things and for yourself. And for this we have to ask ourselves a few questions. When you speak with Taoists and they look for translation of the Tao Te Ching, they usually call, well, the Tao Te Ching is about the moral nature of the world and of the sage and of the emperor and so on and so on. So Tao Te Ching is usually about morality. This is basically how it's being seen. And this brings us to the character of Jing. That character of Jing is seen as the meaning of how do you call this? The meaning of classic, usually as a sutra from Buddhism, but the real meaning is that of undercurrents in the landscape and weaving of cloth and so on. So the Jing in that sense is more about the weaving of meanings through which you understand reality. Reality as it is cannot be understood without a theoretical foundation. This is one of the things that the Tao Te Ching says. If you don't understand what is the logic and the causality behind things, then at that moment it will be not possible to understand the Tao Te Ching or anything behind it. In effect, it actually says, I think in, well, one of the texts anyway, that you need to develop yourself to be able to live properly in the world. Even though you keep your life simple, you have to make sure that you get properly taught, and as a result of that, you get to understand what you are actually doing. So that brings us to the next part, which kind of subjects the Daodejing is being divided in, because that is basically what it is. It is divided into 81 zheng. These are chapters. There is this cutoff somewhere around the middle where it shifts from things that are de and things that are dao, right? And the way how they interchange is very interesting to see. But there are separate other secondary parts that are equally interesting to watch. So the thing is, the Daodejing, when you read the Daodejing, do you start at the back side or on the front side? In the Daodejing, of course, in Old Chinese, you start in reverse from what we in the West do, because here we read like this, and there they read like this, right? And they write the characters up and down because they were written on bamboo slips, and these bamboo slips, they were not horizontal, but they were vertical, so that when you roll it out, you can go through a text like this. Yes, so you have to understand that the language is like that. It is a little bit like when you're watching The Matrix and you see all the characters brain by through which they can understand reality. This is basically the Chinese language as it was. So the Daodejing is like you're looking at the Matrix screen.
We should make a Daodejing version with digital green and black letters, I guess.
Anyway. When you look at the subjects, you see that if you start from the front, within modern translations, interpretation is usually the front, then you see that the first thing it starts talking about Dao. What is Dao? Daoqi Dao, Fei Chang Dao. Dao, that Dao is amazing Dao. And there is already a problem in translation and interpretation, so I will not go too deep into it, but it's just that you understand that it is like that. The thing is about creation and how do you name it. The aspect is related to the name and the form. The Tao is related to its origin and what it wants to be, what it wants to do, what it wants to contribute. So that's a very important part. Then after they talk about Tao, Laozi talks about Tao, then at that moment he starts talking about heaven. Heaven is then what understands the Tao best. When you compare it with the I Ching, then you can see, okay, I Ching has 64 hexagrams. All hexagrams point towards heaven. Heaven is the access to Tao. So you first have to understand and comply with heaven and nature as a result of that, and then the rest will come. The world is divided in 3 layers, namely heaven, human realm, and the earthly realm. The human realm or the animal realm or the plant realm, all these realms, they're all stuck between heaven and earth. In the earth, there are the realms of the underground beings, which we usually call the hell worlds in the last few thousand years. And then in heaven, this is where the heavenly beings and the immortals reside. But there's immortals here too, and there's immortals there too, and they all have a particular kind of function in the reality of things. And for this you have to look at my wilderness series, because it explains about immortals and wilderness and these kind of things. There was basically a preparation for this video, I guess. Then from heaven, you have to understand that rulership is seen as expressing the will of heaven. That means that as a ruler, you have to become a sage to be able to understand the will of heaven. And so if you are as a ruler, you are not a sage, that means that you are a bad ruler. And that means that somebody who is not properly prepared to be a ruler should not be a ruler. In the I Ching, then again, there is in, I think, 24. Oh, anyway, one of the I Ching hexagrams, it talks about the Fei King takes the seat of the ruler and has to behave as if he is a real ruler to be able to not to be dethroned immediately. So that means that you really are required to understand these qualities through which you deserve the title Son of Heaven, right? So it's not just a title, it is actually a meaningful thing. It has to do with what you are allowed to understand and what you're not allowed to understand. So as a person, if you are in accord with Tao, you first have to comply with heaven. That is what Daoists do. They try to comply with heaven, they try to understand heaven, they try to make themselves into tianxia, and that means that they try to include in themselves everything that has to do with earth and with the human realm or the animal realm, and to adapt to that in such a way that they can understand the influence of heaven, therefore understand heaven, and from understanding heaven can comply with Tao. So it's a very difficult and complicated trajectory. It's not like, oh yeah, now I understand Tao. As a result of that, when you understand Tao, then your actions actually have this particular kind of superpower, and that is called the daoqi that you then have. So, like for instance in your body, when your organs have qi, or when your words have a qi, that means that they are in accord with the will of heaven and they are in accord with the Tao, and as a result that they have a qi. So if you are not in accord with these things, you can feel whatever you want, but it has nothing to do with qi. So you have to make sense of these things. You have to understand that the idea of being in accord with Tao and heaven, this is a state of perfection, and your qi in that sense is related to perfection. If you are not perfect, no qi. That's basically it. So you have to question yourself every lesson when you give Tai Chi Chuan, or you give Qigong, or you give meditation, you talk about the qi. What are you actually saying? Are you lying to people, or are you speaking truth? And that means you have to really investigate the language of what you say. And this is basically what Daoism is all about, and what the Daodejing is all about, what Zhuangzi also is about, in the sense that you have to really understand what these kind of things are about. And if you are not understanding the language, if you do not understand the meaning, if you didn't have proper support in learning, then at that moment, whatever you say
is just Orientalist fantasy, as Kirkland says.
So when we talk about rulership in that sense, in Zhang 75, what I said, the ruler is obliged to become a sage, and as a sage you are actually also not interested in being a ruler, because being a ruler is basically a very heavy burden. Daodejing says also the best ruler is the ruler that is not known, and that is anonymous, and that people do not even know that they are being ruled. So it's a non-intrusive rulership. Somewhere else also the Daodejing speaks about that people, when they feel interfered by politics, government, and so on, they become rebellious, and that means that ideal governance is like almost like absent in the presence of people. Authoritarian regimes, even the strict rule of law, as is now being proposed in the West. These are forms of they are requiring you to submit to systems. And I know that the idea of the rule of law was mostly developed by anarchists already from the beginning of the 20th century, and sometimes I'm really embarrassed that I was a big fan of that, and nowadays this is basically what it has been made into, because as a good society you have to live in a society of trust, and this society with the rule of law is based on the fact that nobody can trust each other, so it's very Masonic, and it is the opposite of what is meant in the Daodejing. Then the next thing is that you have to become a sage. So that's the next topic that is talked about, and there is this intermediate state in when they talk about the Daodejing. There's a few Zhang talks about behavior, about meditation, about lifestyle, and so on, and it shifts basically into the idea of sagehood, and sagehood description basically shows all kind of things you can do, what you can benefit, how you can benefit, and so on and so forth. And basically what it says, when you are a sage, you are aware of all the three realms, and you are free to move between these three realms. And that is what it's all about for Daoists. To be a sage, as Laozi says, means that you can talk with the creatures in heaven, you can communicate with the creatures in hell, and you can understand the nature around you. So by understanding the world around you, not just society, but actually also understanding animals and plants, and supporting these plants, benefiting these plants, and not thinking about yourself, but just make sure that everything is going as good as you can, as it can, at your own expense, even if necessary, then at that moment you can say, okay, this is somebody who has the capacity to become a sage. The stories of Lu Dongbin, very famous Daoist, they are about observations of famous Daoists who were living, famous people who lived selfless lives, and as a reward he would give a magic pill through which somebody will become an immortal and can rise up into heaven, and then can take a job as an administrator in the heavenly bureaucracy. One of the things that many Chinese classics do is they compare the present with the past, and they look at ancienity as a perfect world where people were living in a particular kind of way, in accord with nature, and like in the Daodejing, it describes different levels of immortality, and several other classics you find the same, where you see how your commitment to nature as a whole, your integration with nature as a whole, goes at the expense of your selfishness, and therefore your wanting and your desires and your angers and your fears and so on, and you start to become basically like the animals in nature, that you just basically are in accord with nature as a whole. Not to romanticize, because living in nature, things can go wrong, and as a result of going wrong, you can lose your life. This is one of the disadvantages. But the idea, what they said, like these people were, because of being a sage, they were integrated so much with nature that they could live like 10,000 years or something like this, and as a result that would live like almost forever. Therefore they would go a few steps beyond that, what we would normally call primitivism. Then we discussed already also the world reality, how people should live in communities, and how the sage actually travels between these different kind of realms. So the fact that these realms exist, and so on and so forth. This is what the Daodejing is all about. And one of the other things is that basically the Daodejing discusses that most people in the world, they're in relationship to Dao and Daoists, they are pretty stupid. They consider what Daoists do weird, strange, crazy. They don't understand why anybody would live such a life, because they are motivated by their wants, and as a result their jing is broken down, such as the Daodejing, and as a result of that they get diseases and they die. And the Taoists say, well, if that is the case, why want something, right? So just try to live in accord with nature. The only thing you should want is to try to live in accord with nature and eventually end up as an immortal. Sounds interesting, right? So when you look at some of the views of the Daodejing, there are some very interesting views in there, and I will give you a few views which I think are interesting, because you also see references in other books, like Zhuangzi talks at a certain point about when you cut up something into smaller and smaller pieces, when does something stop being that thing? Like for instance, if you take a stick of bamboo, you cut it into pieces, when does it stop being bamboo? In the West, in our science, we always want to investigate what is behind the bamboo, what is underneath the bamboo, like the molecules and the atoms. And when it is already long time no more bamboo, then they're still interested. But in the Daodejing and in Zhuangzi, they say, look, things are like that. The reason is because in the Daodejing it says, look, what you see is that by cutting things up, you can do things with it, you can make things out of it. That is basically also the Western Greek idea of the atoma, right? So you can cut things up and you can recombine, and you can make a chair out of pieces of bamboo, you can make a table out of pieces of bamboo, you can make a house out of pieces of bamboo. So things have their functionality by cutting them up and reassembling them. But as a sage, you try to remain unified with things. So the things you try to keep whole. So the bamboo, you try to grow into the grove, and as a result that you are like that, like a bamboo in a grove. You don't want to be cut up and cut into pieces and to made into practical things, like what people do when they go to school. Their education cuts them up in pieces, reassembles them, and makes something else out of them. However useful within this society, as a Taoist, that is not exactly what you're looking for. That doesn't mean that you don't need scholarship. You need scholarship, though, that helps you to find these kind of views. And all science can still fit in there, because in modern Taoist education, you still get all these scientific things. But, you have fed them into these ideas about how Taoists would look at that. Another one, for instance, in Chang number 40, Laozi talks about the movement of Tao, and the movement of Tao is like returning. So Tao doesn't go forward, it seems to always go back to something, so it continuously loops back on itself. It's like a feedback system, basically. And when you look at the Tao of the Tao, every time when you try to understand the Tao, you see that the Tao is always yielding. So the Tao of the Tao is in yielding. That means also for us to be able to yield in all kinds of situations, like in communication, conflict, aggression, in relationships, in work, and so on and so on. When there is difficulties, we yield, so we avoid also becoming stressed because of becoming too involved, and as a result of that, losing ourselves in things. And so we stay closer to ourselves in that sense. In the same tongue, it says tian, heaven, and the inherent nature of things, and 10,000 things. These are all the results of existence. And when you look at existence, you see that it originates in the Tao, and the Tao, in that sense, is taking things from non-being and creates existence. So the irony is that Tao movements is that one of returning, but it is also at the same time the creation of things. And this actually makes our story round, because this is where we started at the beginning. So I hope you really liked this and that you had a lot of fun with this text, and that it inspires you to go read the Daodejing, to come follow classes about things, so that you can come have a better understanding of the Daodejing, and that we can all together study the Daodejing and become true Daoists. The Daodejing is well, comprehensive, you can say, and you need a long time to really understand it very well. I'm very happy that you have been concluding this video and that you have been watching the video all the way to the end. And if you haven't done yet, please give me a like, make sure you become a member from the group, and if possible also join our Patreon. At the moment when you join our Patreon, you have a lot of different kind of benefits. You can also study Chinese medicine with me, or you can just study Tai Chi Chuan or qigong or yoga in our online classes every week. And you will pay about $1 or €1 per lesson or something. Somebody calculated for me one time, because of the many lessons inside the package. So that is a very attractive thing. When you have questions, make sure you put them below so that I can answer your questions. You can also message me directly on my WhatsApp. When you become a member, that is automatically revealed to you, of course, because then you can be added to the group where we can have all kind of discussions and talks about these kind of subjects. When you have an interesting topic for me to talk about, I will definitely add it to my list. I don't have a waiting list for things. If you make me enthusiastic, I will definitely put it forward on the list, because I have so many topics to talk about. Chinese medicine, Daoism, Wudang Kung Fu, it is all very extensive as a topic. And I really look forward to share all these things with you, and also to learn from you, of course, in return. And together we can build a great community, and we can make a change in the world. And this is all what we do it for, because we are not satisfied. This is why we study these kind of things. At least I think you can agree with me on that. I look forward to see you in the next episode, and thank you for watching this one. And don't forget, the next episode is even more interesting than this one.